So I think definitely some mindset shifts there to understand that standards don't have to equal low quality or a lack of creativity or, stifling that. And that you can actually use them to amplify great customer experience, make more room for creativity and inspiration so that you don't feel like you're always butting up against deadlines at razor thin profit margins and otherwise chasing your tail.
Hey everybody, today we are joined by Melissa Morris. She is the founder of Agency Authority and the creator of the Top Framework. With over a decade of agency experience, she helps owners streamline operations, boost capacity, and grow sustainably without burning out their teams or crushing creativity. Through her consulting and content, Melissa is on a mission to fix the long hours and low profit. That problem that's plaguing creative agencies by building systems that really create that we can create growth and calm and not scale that chaotic madness that sometimes lives in the agency world. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for having me on.
So you and I both work obviously a lot with creative agency owners. And, the thing that I've run into quite a lot is they kind of pushback, this like very visceral response to the idea of systems, of process. Why do you think that agency owners avoid this idea of systems so frequently and resist it so much?
I think I've seen a couple of reasons why that resistance comes into play. One of the big ones is somehow they start to make this connection that systems, standards equals low quality, low budget, and that they can't offer a high touch, really great experience for their clients if somehow they have these standards or templates in place. And I notice that's a big point of friction for them. And then with that can also come waterfall fears of, well, what if we come up with a great idea and the team is really moving in a great direction, but we're confined to this package or this scope? Like, how are we supposed to work around that? And so I think definitely some mindset shifts there to understand that standards don't have to equal low quality or a lack of creativity or, stifling that. And that you can actually use them to amplify great customer experience, make more room for creativity and inspiration so that you don't feel like you're always butting up against deadlines at razor thin profit margins and otherwise chasing your tail.
I agree that a lot of them feel that this idea of the templatization component, and the reality, at least as I see it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is that when you have systems and templates and frameworks that you're working within, and a template can be, an email that you're sending, not a template in the creative work that you have as an output, but that it allows for you to then have a framework to know that you're going with outside of it to create this a little bit of augmentation, a little bit of, space, capacity. I mean, there needs to be some fluidity in systems in them of itself, but it doesn't, in order for you to understand where you're even going outside the lines, when you're coloring outside the lines, that you need to know where the line is. And so many people just don't even know where the line is in the first place.
Yes. This is another way I work with clients. So when we're thinking about creating standards, our minds go to standard operating procedures, and we have to write down all these SOPs, and we're going to click here and we're going to do this, right? And we all live in this rigid little box where no one makes a mistake. I tell them, though, there's another side to this same coin, and they're what I call best practices. And it's creating the container that you're speaking about, right? So what is the best practice for executing this task, this idea? We're always going to spend 2 hours of brainstorming time. Now, if you want to whip out a whiteboard, if you want to stroll through the park, however you feel inspired and whatever that looks like to you, cool. But we still need some container with which we know that when we've done this fully and we've honored our commitment to the client, but we also haven't gotten so carried away that now we're putting timelines and stuff in jeopardy. So I really encourage business owners, when there are things that don't feel step by step, where can we create some guardrails? Where can we put some boundaries in place so that everybody knows they're operating within that? And that does yield better results.
So there's two things that I think that's interesting. And I realize that there's an augmentation to something that I've said before. It's the idea of being able to have a white canvas. It feels, and so many people like to have every single scope of work to be, bespoke, different, novel. And it creates for a lot of chaos in the operations. And one of the things that I used to say, and I'm going to make an augmentation, is that having a white canvas, it allows for a lot of creativity, but it also can create for a lot of creative writer's block, if you will, or
Yeah.
creative block, if you will, right? Having every opportunity in front of you. So that idea of constraints, but also not having it so filled in that you are too rigid and not actually able to be creative. And there's like a great middle ground between the two of, and I really see, I realize that this is offensive, and I'm not trying to be offensive, but that the idea that you need to have everything be so novel, I think that it's a lot easier to be creative in that circumstance, and that it's actually more difficult within a constraint, within a box. And that box can be the audience of your client. That box can be the business objectives that you need to live within. And those boxes actually create for meaningful constraints that allow for the work to be elevated. And it's more difficult to be creative with those constraints and with those boxes. And for a creative that really wants to produce great work, that's actually necessary. It actually allows for you to elevate yourself, elevate the work, and elevate the impact that you're having for clients.
I really, really agree with that. And I think that's really important. And I love how you started thinking about, are we talking about our audience? Are we talking about within the scope of like the business plan, the project plan, whatever that looks like? And then here's what I would say too. If you, and we're going to sidebar here for just a second. I think if you as a creative team are constantly finding yourself saying, I can't work with the hours I'm given. I can't create,
I've
right?
never heard that.
No, I know. Everybody's like, what? This doesn't happen. Like, I can't work in this way. Like, I can't do something else is going on. Maybe you're not talking to the right audience. Maybe you need to be talking to an audience who sees a need for more dollars towards this activity, more dollars towards this project. Maybe there has been a misalignment in how scope is getting communicated to you. Maybe it's not a complete rebrand and you're going to spend a bunch of time on it. Maybe it's a refresh. And these little changes in language and understanding of scope and purpose are very, very important. So I would say if you are feeling like my agency could never work like inside these guardrails and this, then we need to look at some other things going on and figuring out why that feels like you're being suffocated versus saying, okay, I'm going to roll up my sleeves, challenge accepted, and I can get this done.
That reminds me of something that you said in the pre-conversation and prep for recording, in that you said something along the lines of, that a lot of agencies don't actually have a systems problem, they have a clarity problem. And that feels very in alignment with that. Can you expand on that kind of idea that we were talking about before?
Yes. And I think systems can only come from clarity, right? Like you can't create a process and a system. You're not even sure what it is you're creating a system and process for. So I created a TOP framework. It's TOPP. And I actually use this to help agency owners start to create a lot of clarity. So we're going to look at things like your team, your offers, your pipeline. Your pipeline, I consider your previous, current, and future clients, because you should be looking to all three for revenue generating opportunities.
Yes.
And then we're getting into our processes, which will ultimately lead to profit. But if we are not clear on our offers, we are not clear among our team on who's handling what and who's in charge and who's ultimately accountable. If we're not clear on who we're serving, this idea that I'm going to start writing a bunch of SOPs and start scaling and delegating like a champ is just really a fool's errand.
It really is. And it even in that kind of circumstance can be quite impossible. I mean, the reality is that if every single scope of work that you're doing, every single thing, every deliverable is different because it's so novel and different, because one example is that you're not specialized, you're working with loads of different industries. And I was listening to a podcast episode where the agency was describing the fact that on the same day they were working with a private equity firm and then a nail salon in the creative work that they were doing. It's like, those are so dramatically different in the work that they're doing, right? It's like, they were saying it as like this brag one. I'm like, that's quite complicated. And trying to create systems between those they're so different. And the way that you work with them are completely different. Impossible to be able to create that. And so the item that I wonder, right, and I've gone through my own experiences, but I'm curious to see your own take on this. And I've even gone through this personally myself, is that there's a moment where you end up having this like aha moment where like the chaos that you're living in, where it's like, no, this is too much. I'm throwing in the towel of the way that I'm currently working, and I'm going to go down a different path. And I see that happen frequently for agency owners. And I'm curious on like the moment, this like aha moment that you see happen with a lot of agency owners, when does that actually happen where it just like pops that they need to actually go and do something differently?
So it usually comes when we're working on their offers. And I will say, typically what happens is either one of two things start to get uncovered, is we're having conversations, and it usually stems from complaints around their team. My team's not taking accountability. They're not taking ownership. Everything's always behind. I'm still checking everything. And I say, okay, well, let's start to unpack that. I always come back to, what do your offers look like? What do you have going on here? And then they'll start telling me, well, this client likes it this way, and this client wants to report like this. And then they always have their special client and their legacy client and their best client and their worst, right? Like they have all these labels and buckets. I see you laughing, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? Like there's always a story about like their special snowflake client that we've got to address. And one of two things is either happening. Either they themselves have started to overcomplicate things and really over accommodate client requests. Well, this client likes to report a little different. Why? Tell them no. Tell them no, that's not how you deliver the reports. And it will probably be okay. Like I'm willing to bet it would be just fine.
And even understanding the why, right? Because if you understood the why and even just asked and inquired, you would understand, okay, well, here's how they're thinking about it. They're thinking about it the wrong way. The way that we deliver the reports is actually a better utility. And so let me explain the why that allows for it to be within our framework. I mean, the reality is, and I'm going on a soapbox for a second, sorry. The reality is like if you're allowing the client to control every single piece of this, you are not the expert. They are. And why did they hire you? Yes. You're supposed to be here to help guide the client. What are you doing if you're just acquiescing to every single thing that they ask? I'm not saying that there are not give and takes in client relationships. There absolutely are. But is this the right give and take? Again, another thing that we were joking about in this kind of idea that the clients we work with often kind of think in chaos, whereas you and I think in spreadsheets. And I'm curious on like the distinction between, the type A, type B oriented piece of like the personalities within agencies of the creative mind versus the structured mind. And how do they live in like a symbiotic relationship that allows for the agency to really thrive? Because I think that both are really necessary.
They are really necessary. And I've worked with a number of agencies on this where they did have the creative director or some strong creative leads who were really struggling with the systems and processes, the way we were setting up the project management tool, and they were really finding it stifling. And I always go about that first with, have we trained them? Right? Like first, is this actually broken? Or are we just experiencing some complaints or right? Like, right? Are they showing up? Are they trying? Right? Or is this really, and maybe sometimes it really is just interfering with how their brain works. Like it's just really a struggle for them. And so in which case I like to start to involve them in the process of creating the process. So I would have a number of calls. Like in this example, I met several times with the creative director who oversaw all the website design. And I said, tell me more about how this process looks. Okay, I understand there are parts that feel a lot more fluid or maybe organic. And so how can we still account and manage this time and let your project manager know what the heck's going on? The account manager can actually tell the client an accurate update, but without you feeling like, I have this task in Asana and it's not due until after this one, but I need to do it at the same time. And so we worked together over a series of calls to say, how can we give each half of the brain what they need in order to succeed? And involving them in that process a little bit, I found was very helpful. Again, we want to be careful. We can't have every team member creating their own processes. And then we've got, Asana and ClickUp building up in silos, which is why I always think one person should be the one overseeing the total build out and management of it. But I think getting a deeper perspective of how they actually work in real life, because sometimes what's on paper isn't how it shakes out.
I also think that there's like just the mutual respect of the utility of the two different minds is really important. I mean, the part of the reason why I enjoy working with creative so much, and I'm married to a creative, and listeners of this podcast know that have heard me say this before, but like my mind, as I was just saying, is like very much spreadsheet, like very incredibly linear. And I can come into this recording of this podcast right now. My husband's outside in the backyard at the moment, and he was sitting outside, and I can pretty much guarantee that by the time that I'm done with this and I go back outside into the living room, he's probably sitting in the same spot, still staring out into the sky. And like, I find that beautiful, like incredibly beautiful. And there's this like kind of concept of two pieces. One, like the ADHD mind, this like quick start oriented creative, the person that like has a problem with like staying in this kind of linear oriented framework, like the consistency behind it. And their brains just work differently. And it allows for this beautiful output that my mind just can't do. But there are design systems that actually work for them. And I'm curious to hear your take on it, because I actually see the utility of needing to have a framework, especially for the ADHD mind, that quick start creative, that Aquarius mind, to have a framework to work within. Like my husband really relies on time rigidity, things like that allow for him to be able to do the things that he needs to, but understanding how his body and mind work. So how much time of focus he has, and is he better in the morning? Is he better in the afternoon? I definitely had some influence there, but I'm curious to hear your take.
Yeah, so some of the ways we've worked with creatives and agencies in this capacity is thinking about things a bit more modular. Again, that I think that allows them to have a little flexibility on how they may go about it. I'm going to work on this piece versus this piece, and thinking about things in chunks and bits versus more deadlines and client updates, and just giving them the flexibility to say like, okay, within this period of time, I need you to accomplish the module, like whichever one it is. I almost don't even care. And then also we have worked with, I've worked with creatives before where I do ask them like, how much time do you need? Because sometimes they really will go head down, and then we lose them for 6 or 8 hours, and they're not going to check ClickUp, right? Like they're not going to come in and check ClickUp 2 or 3 times a day. Like some of us, right? More account manager, more type A linear people are. We're going to get in, we're going to see our updates, we're going to get our lunch. And we feel really comfortable, and we really thrive in that mode, right? Like it helps us stay on task. It helps us prioritize. And that's how our brain operates. That is just not how theirs is going to operate. And so letting them have space to say, okay, you're going to go head down, and we know you're not going to check Asana, and you're not going to check ClickUp. And if something urgent comes through and we need you, what is the way though we're going to alert you that we're going to touch base with you? And so I have often recommended that agency owners have different like battle rhythms for when they need to be checking Slack or their project management tools and such, so that if they need to go head down and get lost in web design or branding or whatever for 2 days, we give that to them. And then, but you need to come up for air and check in with us on Wednesday. we need a check-in. And sometimes what can work better also is like a face-to-face check-in, Zoom to Zoom check-in. Sometimes that can work better because they can talk through or explain versus asking them to go in and like put a bunch of comments somewhere or task things out. So I will say it's always a very delicate balance between letting them kind of go rogue and do what they want and feel like everybody's chasing them around looking for updates, but also like adjusting things and giving them the space they need to like truly be creative.
So you've said 3 things that I want to like double tap on. One, I 100% agree on like the communication framework thing. That's really important. The heads down thing, I think, is both important for the creative, but also can be the demise as well. Like, I mean, there's been so many instances where like I'm walking past a piece of art that my husband's working on, and like he'll generally kind of draw things out on his iPad to begin with. And like, I'll see what it is that he's working on, and like he'll continue working on it, and then I'll comment on it because he can like scroll back in like the timeline of what it was that he was creating. And then I'll like scroll back and I'm like, I think it was better here than what you actually took it to this point, and for X, Y, and Z reason. And sometimes you actually just need to stand up, kind of walk away from what it is that you're working on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been lots of studies on the idea of like 25 versus 50-minute blocks, but it's pretty universal at this point that psychologists believe that human brains operate best in like 50-minute focuses. And so it doesn't mean that you need to go and check Asana or go check ClickUp. That's not what I'm saying in that moment, because that may absolutely disrupt your flow. But go get a drink of water. Go get up and walk outside for a second. Just like maybe put your feet in the grass outside and then come back inside and continue working. And it just allows for you just to reset your mind just slightly to allow for you to continue to have that right creative flow. I'm curious if you kind of see the same thing and like how that works with that modular environment and like that communication framework.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really great point. And so I think that can be why modular can help, because And that when like in our website design, we're thinking of like, no, we're just doing homepage, right? Like you're just mocking homepage or you're just doing a mood board or you're just whatever. And then we're going to check in as a creative team. Maybe we're going to check in with the client and then we're going to go. You can't let them go head down, build a whole website in 3 days on a bender and then come up for air. And we realize
On a bender.
it is not what we were expecting, right? So I think kind of chunking it and really capping them like, you have to stop here, right? Like, I don't care if you're in the zone or whatever, you have to stop here.
Yeah.
And that's where some of that modular comes into play. And then
Yeah.
we also have, I've worked with agencies where we've built in moments for them to connect with another creative on the team, or maybe check in with
Yes.
the account manager, because I think that's speaking to what you're talking to, where, sometimes, and I think I'm just not the creative type. I'm with you. I'm like, I don't know how their brains work. I'm kidding.
I'm mesmerized, but I can't do it.
It's fascinating, right? But I think they have like our version of perfectionism looks different than theirs, and they can get very much into like shades or colors or angle or whatever, right? And I think having a fresh perspective and someone to kind of take you a minute, pull you out and say, let's look at what we've got here and let's make sure that we're not straying too far or we're not overthinking something is really valuable. It's valuable for all of us, right? It just looks different depending on your role in an agency or, the way you serve clients.
One of the things that I'm curious on too here is the reality of how systems actually support creativity and flexibility. So here's a scenario. I'm curious to hear your experience with clients on it. But like, let's say that I'm currently operating in a place where I don't have any systems. I don't know what it is the next step is supposed to be. I don't have those check-ins, that modular-oriented framework. And so now a fire comes up that I have to work on something for X, Y, and Z reason, or a scope of work needs to change, or a piece of client feedback didn't happen. But I don't actually have a system to understand how these kind of different modular pieces fit together. And so I don't even have the information in front of me to make a decision of how to move things around, to be flexible in that moment. And the reality is I feel like there's so much of like, I am just running by the seat of my pants, trying to figure out what's going on and how I'm going to get things going. And then it ends up creating for like, I'm working until midnight tonight in order to be able to get this done. Or like, I'm going to work all weekend long because everything kind of piled and I didn't realize it was going to pile, but it did pile and all the deadlines are now on Monday. And like, I get to burn the midnight oil. And that happens too frequently, I find, and actually see a lot of utility in actually creating for the space, the capacity. I mean, the reality of creativity is that it's not like, okay, well, in the next 5 minutes, come up with the best creative idea, right? Go.
Right.
No, not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious on your experience.
So I have a few things to say there. The short answer is I always recommend we're building in buffer time. If you're going to tell the client that it's going to be done by Friday, internally, you should think it's done on Wednesday. And that is the deadline that we should be communicating, because we know things are going to come up, fires are going to happen, right? I will say though, I do often see I will echo what you're saying there, is we can feel like we're always living in this reactive mode. Everything's always burning down. And this is where I think we do need to rely on the account managers. We do need to rely on our type A folks to be in effective communication with our clients. And this is coming back to where that clarity, right? Like we can't create processes to manage last minute changes. Someone was out sick. We didn't get the feedback on the day we were expecting it to get back. How are we going to handle that? You can start to build in processes, but there has to be clarity around it first. If the scope was always fuzzy and we were not communicating to the client that if they missed their feedback deadline, then their deliverable was going to get pushed back, then we're dropping the ball on that end. So I think a lot of that starts to come into client management. And I see that a really lot where they say, the client was supposed to have us the feedback on Monday. They didn't get it to us till Thursday morning, and we told them they'd have their proof by Friday. All hands on deck, proof is due Friday. No, right? No. The proof was due back to them on Friday when they got you the edits on Monday. But what happens is they get themselves stuck. They weren't communicating well to the client. They weren't being upfront that a delay on their end was going to ultimately cause delays further down the pipe. And then they feel bad and they take it on and the client's going to get mad. So you've got to be really clear and communicate well up front, or you will always be putting out fires.
So let's say that a client is in that moment. So they've got a client fire. They are going to be working all weekend long this weekend because this thing's going on, and they're listening to this episode right now. And so we're telling them that they need to be building systems and processes and frameworks and work in a more modular framework. And they're probably saying, lots of four-letter words to us
Very
right now.
colorful language.
Yeah. And so on Monday, where can they start? I mean, the reality is they're not going to build Rome in a day. They're not going to fix all of their chaos in one moment. What is the first thing that you would suggest that they start with to start to make movement towards it, just progress in the right direction?
Yes, I think offers. I think getting clear on your offers and making sure your team is really clear on the offers. And if you don't have a productized service offering now, you feel like you don't have standardized offers, that's okay. But is everybody really crystal clear about what this client is paying for and what the expectation is for successful delivery of that scope of work? Okay, even if it's completely different for every client, that's okay. But a lot of times your team is not very clear and your client is not very clear. And that's how we end up with lots of last minute, right, emergencies. So get really, really clear on that. The second thing I think you should do is work on a communication SOP, particularly your client communication SOP. And this is where we're going to start building in things like, what happens if I don't hear from the client when they were supposed to give me feedback by? What is my next step? What is my next step? What type of canned emails can I offer them to hold the boundary when the client is asking for something that's out of scope? What do I tell them? Should I remind them their deadline? Like, what do I need to work with? And how can I train and support my team members to know when they can push back, when they hold a boundary, and what the boundary even is, right? Like, I can't hold a boundary if I don't know what it is. So getting clear on those and then communicating it with your team, because once you start getting those boundaries in place, everybody knows what they're doing, when it's due, who it's due for, and how they're going to operate and communicate if things are getting missed. So many of the fires just never even start.
I agree so much. I mean, I think that the reality of the communication piece is one of the first steps to understanding and creating some like just turning the temperature down.
Yes.
And the chaos of the agency so incredibly important. Because here's how I see it, I guess a bit, is that the when you're thinking about the idea of like systemizing your business, the reality is that you think about it in like this, there's so much that I need to get done. But when you look at like, I have too much to get done, it's not going to happen. So then I'm just going to ignore it because it feels too big. So you avoid it. But progress creates more energy, which then creates more momentum. So if you're able to make just a small little, and it's not a little win, that communication piece, it's actually a significant one that creates more energy because it starts to create more space, more capacity to then be able to do the next piece that you can then invest that time that you saved into the next component. And it just allows for so much excitement in the direction. I mean, I know for me, right, I'm human like the rest of us, and we can look at our day, our week, our month, and then look at our goals and how much we're looking to accomplish, and then judge ourselves very harshly. And I'm not making as much progress as I want to be making. But then you look at things longer, right? Like now let's look at 3 to 5 years. And it's like things look a lot differently when you look at a longer timeline. Like I can pretty much guarantee you most days that I sit down, I'm like, I'm going to get all these things done. It's like, yeah, I made progress, but I didn't get it done. And that's not bad or good, but you just look at a longer timeline and it allows for you to be able to see, and it's important for you to make progress towards it because it does compound and accumulate.
Yes. I heard someone once say people always drastically overestimate what they're going to get done in a year, but severely underestimate what they can do in 10, right? Like people will think, I'm going to be a millionaire this year, but I couldn't be a 10 millionaire in 10 years, right? Like it's funny how our brains work. We'll set these big, crazy goals for a year that just aren't going to happen, but can't picture a life that's radically different 10 years down the road, right? Even though so much more time has passed. And I do know this can feel daunting. It can feel like a heavy lift. It can feel like a lot going on. And so one of the things I always remind my business owners is build as you go. Build as you go. If you're getting ready to onboard a new client, you know what the next process you should look at streamlining and working on in your agency is? Onboarding. Let's go ahead and look at client onboarding, right? Like team meetings are a drag and a drain and everybody hates them and they're just soaking up so much time. Hey, what should we look like? What should we look at getting more efficient? Where can we implement? hey, team meetings. And if you just slowly chip, and it gets easier, like you said, right? Like if I really dial in client onboarding, client delivery is automatically going to be a lot easier because I was really
Hmm.
clear upfront about what was about
Yep.
to go on and to happen, right? So there definitely is a bit of that compounding effect.
That
Hmm.
cascading impact. The One of the things that was coming to mind while we've been chatting is it was like 3 to 6 months ago. I was having a conversation with a client, and he was having a real hard time with a lot of his team members, and he felt like they were not actually holding themselves accountable in actually getting things going. And I questioned when he was describing the amount of conversation, the way that he was trying to go about keeping people accountable and like having systems implemented and like trying to delegate things. And what I asked him to do was to go and do a personality evaluation of the team. And he went and did that and ended up realizing that he had absolutely no one that was on the information gathering, the systems oriented person, the person that likes to work within systems on the team. And so I'm curious in your take, and that led us to then needing to go find a person to actually be that at the agency that could be that project manager, could be that utility for him. And I'm curious to hear your take on when someone should be looking for external help, whether that is a partner, an external consultant, or a team member that allows for them to fill the gap of what's going on from a skill perspective at the agency.
There could be a few red flags that are pointing to the fact that you might need some outside support. I think one of which is personality or how people work. I have any of the agencies that come to work with us, I have the agency owner and then any other key leadership who are going to be involved in the process take the Colby. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Colby A. Yep.
4 numbers, right? One of which is fact finder. It's called follow through, but it is someone who's definitely more systems and process oriented. Quick start is your ideas,
Yep.
and implementer is more environmental, more hands on type of
Yep.
work. And I want to know. I want to know what everybody's Colby is, because if I have everybody showing up really low on that follow through, I know a couple of things need to happen. I need to build systems that are simplified, easy to follow, create a variety of checkpoints for them, because it's not in their MO. Like it's not their way of working to want to like dig in and roll up their sleeves and create a bunch of systems. To the counter of that, I have to watch out if they're super, super high on it. Sometimes there can be a tendency to overcomplicate systems and want to create SOPs for everything under the sun. And I'm like, oh, I think there's just an understanding on how we're going to do this. Like, I don't think we need to document absolutely everything. So I do think that can be a really important piece of it. I think another thing is just experience. I think a lot of times people can underestimate what is involved in actually a well thought out and efficient workflow in truly standardized packages that are profitable and can be well executed. I think delegating is often not nearly as easy as it sounds, and we have a tendency to get lost in piecemealing tasks and delegating one-offs versus actually delegating responsibilities, which is a very different approach. So I think experience is another piece. So personality, experience, and then also just the capacity of the people on your team. Maybe you do have somebody who's just very inclined, like they have the personality, they maybe even have some experience in this, but if they're underwater doing a whole bunch of other work and they could use some backup, it can be really helpful. And a fresh set of eyes sometimes too is just so valuable, as we were talking about with our creatives. Sometimes when we're so in the weeds, it's really, really difficult to zoom out and say,
Yep.
oh, these felt like 5 wildly different service offerings, but it turns out it's 3 service offerings with a handful of add-ons, you know? And you're like, it just
Yeah.
took an outside person to see that.
Yeah. You know, the thing that you were talking about too, where you're talking about the reality of them not having anyone with, the follow through on the Colby A in that client example. The thing that I also find quite interesting is that there's so often that we end up judging ourselves or our team for not being the type of personality type. And you're not, at least in my experience, right? Like I can look at my own personality type and I can look at other people and say, it would be great to have that personality characteristic, but I'm just not that person, you know? And I'm not going to try to be, but own who I am and then realize, how do I build a system around the person that I am and own it proudly, but also realize that I still need this piece of life and the world around me to function. And I think there's an ownership in that I think is really useful and helpful. I just fundamentally believe that each person on the planet has a whole lot of benefit to bring the people around them. And how do you look at the benefit that someone really has? Not saying that every single person deserves and should be on your team necessarily,
Right.
but that each person has value. And how do you make that person as powerful as possible and not try to make them something that they're not?
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's true. And that's why when, to circle back to what we were talking about before is let's bring in some of the creative leads, right? Let's bring in some of the people who don't think like we do and get their perspective on how we can organize and set this up. And maybe it's not even the creatives. Maybe it is somebody who's lower on follow through and matching them up with somebody who's higher on follow through. And it's important to set things up in a way that do work for everybody on the team. And this can be in terms of personality. It can also just be in terms of role. The agency owner has a far different need out of ClickUp or Asana than the, project coordinator serving in a support role to your account leads, right? They need very, very different things. So how can we just be really mindful and intentional that we're setting our programs and our tools and our softwares up in such a way that are not only accounting for personality shifts, whether we're type A, type B, and then also like the role within the agency. And it takes some perspective and it takes some experience to know how to do that.
I also think that the reality is that if we were trying to create for ourselves, that would necessitate that every person is like us too.
Right.
And I will tell you what, that if the world was filled with a bunch of Roberts, there would be far too many fucking spreadsheets out there. So we don't want that.
Google
I don't wish that on the world.
Breaks. It just breaks. You get that
servers
snap.
Yeah. I know that you've got this quiz that helps agency owners identify the bottlenecks that they have in their agency to help them in figuring out a pathway forward. Can you share a little bit about that and where they can find it?
Yeah. So, it kind of comes back to some of the things we were talking about. Sometimes it's hard to see the forest through the trees. Sometimes you think it's a delegation problem and it's actually a systems problem, or vice versa. Or you're blaming and you're mad at your clients, and actually what's going on is there's some scoping and, contract issues going on. So it can be difficult. And so this quiz is designed to help you see what's in your blind spot, right? Like help you see what you can't see for yourself, and then offer some next best steps to get that resolved and get moving in the right direction. And you can find that by going to youragencyauthority.com/quiz.
We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Melissa.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in today. With all of the shifts in the industry, it is easy to feel overwhelmed or unsure of your next move. So I'm not here to try to sell you anything. I just want to give back and guide you through the uncertainty. Whether you're navigating new trends or just need some clarity, we're here to listen and offer advice. Head to creativeagencysuccess.com/chat to book a free 15-minute chat with an agency mentor who can provide you with a fresh perspective. Let's figure out the best steps for your agency's growth together.